Get started. Our first speaker is here in the parking lot. I'm sure you can relate to different parking issues, so she'll hopefully be here in just a couple minutes. But I wanted to get our event started and thank you all for joining us for our event today, Human Rights and Gentrification in the Triangle and Globally. And our event is organized by the International Human Rights Clinic and the Center for International and Comparative Law. And we also wanted to thank our co-sponsors, the Duke Human Rights Center at the Franklin Humanities Institute, the Human Rights Law Society, the International Law Society, and the North Carolina Club. And just on cue, this is Cameron Smith, who is a community activist and organizer, and one of the founding members of Communities in Partnership, a community-rooted organizing and education group based in Old East Durham. The vision of Communities in Partnership is, quote, "We envision East Durham and the surrounding area as a vibrant place where all residents have an exceptional quality of life with the economic and political power to impact decision-making that affects their community." The mission of the organization is, quote, "to organize and cultivate long-term residents, especially residents of color and low wealth, to work towards racial, economic, and social liberation." I won't be able to name all of Cameron's accolades here, but among others, Cameron is a 2022 Aspen Institute Healthy Communities Fellow and a 2022 Kresge Fostering Urban Equitable Leadership Organizational Fellow. She also serves on the Executive and Steering Committee for the Equitable Food-Oriented Development, a national collaborative of food system organizations run by Black and Brown communities to reshape the narrative surrounding food, community, and economic development centered in Black and Brown liberation. And she's a Robert Wood Johnson Culture of Health Leader, a designation given to people working to use their influence to advance a culture of health where every resident has a fair opportunity to live a long, healthy life. And finally, she's a member of the Racial Equity Task Force of the City of Durham. Our second speaker is Irene Escueduela, who studied political sciences and public administration in Barcelona and Paris. She holds a bachelor's degree in law and a master's degree in litigation. She specializes in human rights and specifically the right to housing and the city. In Spain, she's worked as a lawyer and as a consultant on a range of different housing issues. Currently, Irene is the director of Observatori d'Esca in Barcelona, Spain. Observatori d'Esca, or ESCER Observatory, is a human rights center that concentrates its efforts on dismantling the devalued perception of economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, such as the right to housing, work, education, health, food, and a safe environment. To this end, the organization combines political advocacy with research, consultancy, and the organization of courses and conferences, as well as strategic litigation. Before turning it over to Cameron Smith, I just wanted to note at the outset that I'm especially excited about this event in which we'll have the chance to learn about gentrification and human rights, both at the very local level here in Durham and globally. And in planning this event, we really wanted to highlight the gentrification happening here in our own communities in Durham and the human rights impacts of this gentrification. And relatedly, we wanted to emphasize the fact that the United States does have human rights obligations and that these obligations extend to local governments as well here in Durham. And with that, I'll hand it over to Cameron Smith.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here. And my name is Cameron Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of Communities in Partnership. As Aya stated, we're a majority Black and a majority woman-led and founded community-rooted organization, and we focus on creating liberative economic development frameworks at the intersections of social determinants of health. We were founded on anti-racism, organizing, activism, leadership development, and training in our very beginning stages. We have developed into or evolved into needing to purchase housing in our community to kind of push against the gentrification. And so we own multifamily units of housing as well as a space for a Black Montessori school in our community. And we're in the process of actually purchasing additional residential housing that includes single family housing. And we hope to develop a strategy for commercial real estate as well. We also have our national work that we're known for most broadly is our food systems work, which is includes our co-op that was founded by people living in Northeast Central Durham, and our BIPOC Farmers Network, which is created to actually provide fresh and local produce for the co-op. We wanted to have an urban to rural economic stream that was owned by Black and brown people, and so we created that to provide ourselves with fresh and local produce that was grown by Black and indigenous farmers. And that the BIPOC Farmers Network was created out of that, and then from that we morphed into an actual storefront that opened up last spring to actually house all of our products that is sourced from Black and brown farmers, and as well as our culinary film collective, which is adjacent to that, having value-added products which are produced by Black and brown femme identifying and women identifying food-based producers that have businesses that aren't predicated on plantation capitalism and extraction. And then we also have our Black think tank, which is our research and our data collection, and our dream space, where we actually are able to ideate, write peer-reviewed articles with our academicians and researchers that we have community-rooted participatory research relationships with, as well as being able to develop strategies on how we can have intersectionality within all areas of social determinants of health that impact Black and brown people. And then we also now, our newest arm that we have added on is our transformative justice arm. We've hired a civil rights attorney. He's on staff to actually mitigate a lot of the negative impacts that have to do with the racialized wealth inequality, gentrification, over-policing, under-policing, things of that nature when the legal system negatively impacts people that are poor. They do not have the economic resources to hire competent legal representation, as well as working closely with the North Carolina Community Bail Fund. And through that, we hold expungement clinics, we do eviction diversion, and also post-conviction relief work is something that they're newly stepping into right now, trying to give some relief to people who have been unjustly incarcerated. And I think that talks about what we do at Community Partnership, but you did want me to speak a little bit about the gentrification, and also the community-rooted methodology. And so community-rooted frameworks, we decided a long time ago, a lot of our work was being co-opted by community-based organizations within the community. Community-based organizations are nonprofits, oftentimes that are founded by people not living in the community, oftentimes people from the outside looking at a community like the community that I live in, and determining what needs to happen, what problems need to be fixed, how do you go about creating the solutions. Well, we've been doing that for quite a while. And if you look at the overall racialized wealth inequality in Durham, with Dr. Henry McCoy, his report that he created a couple of years ago, you will see that Black Durham is at the overall same rate of wealth, collective wealth, as Black Durham had at the emancipation from slavery. And so we own nothing anymore, and that's part of the problem. And so we don't own our own systems, we don't own our own businesses, we don't even own our own real estate anymore. And so historically Black sections of Durham have been bought up oftentimes by wholesalers or conglomerates and people that are looking to actually gentrify the neighborhood. They're looking at what they call renewal or reinvestment or redevelopment, and it's actually the displacement of people who have historically lived there and have been negatively impacted by redlining. What we call it is like a reversal of redlining, because the people that are currently still living there, oftentimes, if you're Black or brown and you live in housing that needs a lot of repair, it's very difficult for you to actually get the loan that you need to be able to actually make those repairs until your neighborhood is gentrified. And then you all of a sudden your house is worth, or the appreciative of the value has increased so that you can actually make those repairs. And so redlining is not just the actual red lines that are on a map that tells banks where to lend and who to lend to and who not to lend to and where not to go. It's also the reversal or the implementation of policies, as even though redlining, quote unquote, has been outlawed right now, there's ways that systems can adapt and change and actually be extractive and withhold resources to people. And that's at the crux of a lot of the gentrification that's going on right now, is that people have not been able to benefit from the appreciation of their house. They have not been able to transfer that down for intergenerational wealth. Wealth within Black and brown people does not flow from child to parent. It flows from parent to child. It flows from child to parent, from child to aunt and uncle if you make it out. One of our co-founders of CIP actually attended undergrad at Duke and had her master's degree at UNC Chapel Hill at the business school. And she often talks about, because people look at her as quote unquote making it out, and she chose to stay in our community, but her responsibility to her family has dramatically decreased the amount of wealth accumulation that she can get just from the fact that she has high credentials that have actually placed her in the availability of having very good paying jobs, because she not only has to take care of her own family, but all in terms of her immediate family, her husband, her kids, but she also has to help her siblings. She has to help her grandparents. And so that's what happens to Black and brown people when they come into these institutions. And especially when you have your family, if you're not decidedly firmly middle class and you come from that perspective, that's another piece of the puzzle that can actually lead to a lot of the financial instability and also the racial inequity that can lead to gentrifying communities and neighborhoods. In addition to people coming in, purchasing up cheap property at a very cheap rate, you just cannot compete with that. We're having to make that decision now. I'm having to come up with frameworks to basically purchase housing at a loss from the organizational perspective, and to take that at a loss, to be reparative in the way that I can actually leverage that for people who can actually live in the community. And so we're looking at a rate of wealth disparity at such a huge rate that even from a nonprofit perspective, I'm having to fundraise to keep people in my neighborhood and having them pay either rents that are not based upon the amount that we pay for the house, or if they are able to purchase it, if we're able to actually create a non-extractive loan process, I have to eat what I paid for the house in the first place. And so that's what we're having to look at, models that are able to do that right now, because again, the appreciation for the house, if my husband and I had to buy our house over again, my husband, we were able to afford for him to go to law school later in life. And so we were decidedly middle class. We've maintained our middle class status. And if we had to buy our house all over again, we would not be able to afford to in our neighborhood right now, and this is the same neighborhood that as students at Duke, they tell you to definitively stay away from. Keep that in mind. And so, but a lot of folks are deciding once they graduate from any university, we have a lot of young folks that are moving into the neighborhood. They look like you guys, which is wonderful and great. But what comes with that is all the privilege of the system that comes with you. No one is meaning to be malicious or harm anyone, but it's just the privilege that comes with that, all those systems that have afforded you the opportunity to be educated in a stellar institution like Duke come with you. And that puts stressors on people who have not been afforded those same opportunities.
Great, thank you so much, Cameron. And we will turn it over now to Irene.
Yes, hello, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can understand my English well. I have already been introduced, me and my organization. So yes, I'm working in a human rights organization based in Barcelona, Spain. And we have been working on the right to housing for over 25 years. So I'd like to share a small presentation. Let's see. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, I guess, can you see it?
Yes, we see a processing point. Should we see a slide itself yet? Here we go. Yes, we see it. Thank you.
But why I can't share the whole. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll be very short. I've enjoyed listening to the former speaker. I like to start explaining why we talk about the right to housing. And now that housing is a commodity more than a right, but it is well established at international level. Housing is a basic need and a right. After the Second World War, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where we introduced this right to housing together with other social rights such as healthcare, food, medical services, etc. And then in 1966, we had the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was already a covenant signed and ratified by most of the states now in the world. Wait a second, because I can't see you, and that's yeah. Well, I continue. I can't see you, but so we had this first declaration, which was symbolic, let's say, and then we had this covenant where we introduced the right to housing as a such, and the states were compelled to realize it and protect it. These are some pictures from several struggles in Barcelona. On the left, the first rent strike in 1931, and now we are talking about a new rent strike this year, and housing problem contribution about Engels and other pictures. So taking into account that the right to housing is a right, and we have this international covenant, but many constitutions in the world also recognize that right, and also at regional level, for example, at the European level, we do recognize the right to housing as well. Why is it a problem? I've seen today this graphic where it said that housing is a global problem, and that people do recognize that as a problem in many countries. Here you can say the US. So it's listed between the first problems by citizens. So housing is a real problem, and it's affected by global dynamics. Housing is a very profitable asset. It's no longer a right, as I was saying. It suffers from commodification, but also after some years, we are also talking about financialization of housing, and we have different reports from the United Nations, for example, from the special rapporteurs talking about financialization of housing and human rights affectations. Of course, the right to housing, but also other rights deprivation when we don't have a house, right to food, education, etc. And gentrification is really linked to that.
Irene, sorry to interrupt. We're still seeing just the second slide on the origin of the right to housing, so I wasn't sure if you wanted us to be looking at the other slides.
Okay, that's weird. Haven't you seen this one?
Now we do, yes. Now we see housing a global problem and the chart.
Okay. And now I have moved?
No, we're still on number 6, it looks like.
Okay.
Okay, now we're on number 8.
8. Well, maybe I can leave the presentation like this, because I'll stop the presentation and then I can share it with you. Because if it's not working well, maybe. Okay, that's better, I guess, for me, because I couldn't see you. So I'll follow the explanation, and then I can share the presentation with you. Mm-hmm. Yes, I was saying that the housing problem is a global trend, and also gentrification is a global trend. And when we speak about the right to housing, we see that the housing model is a combination of the legal framework, which, of course, in some countries we have this for example, constitutional recognition of the right to housing or not, or progressive laws protecting the right to housing, for example, or public policies, the political and economic model, the predominant form of access to housing, if it's property or the tenancy, if you are a tenant, if you are owning property, and also the political and social perception is in relation to this need and the associated problematic ones. And of course, the struggles for the right to housing of the population are key in terms of what kind of housing model we have. So in Europe, we are having a huge problem regarding the rental market right now and gentrification in urbans in many cities, in the main cities of our countries. I know that in the US and as you were explaining right now, you have similar problems. In Spain, we've had different problems, but at the sorry, because I'm moving between the okay. So in Spain, as I'm from Barcelona, in Spain we've had different problems. So before we talked about gentrification, we had a huge mortgage crisis after 2008 with regarding foreclosures, and up to now we've had 800,000 evictions in our country. Then we had these legal changes in order to kind of solve that. But then new investment opportunities came up in our country. So more people started to go on rental because after at that moment we had basically property. I guess it was 80% or 90% of the population owned their house. They were not renting. But after that, we changed our laws after it was in 2013. So the rental market began to increase. And at that moment, we had a change of actors. So we had international investment funds coming to our cities, which didn't exist before. And that's when we saw different phenomena appearing. So if I talk about Barcelona, we can identify different aspects of gentrification. Yes, I'll speak about 4 of them. The first one, which is the most common one in the world, I would say, is regarding our city center. We had a quite small city. We are 1.6 million people living in the city, and we have 2 rivers, a mountain, and the sea, so we cannot grow. And then the city center is a quite vibrant and attractive place to live. So for some years now, I would say 15 years, basically after the 2008 crisis, we've had this change of population. At the beginning, we saw that the population income increased, and that was weird. So we had some studies saying that, okay, it was not that the people living in the city center became richer, that they earned more money, but that people had been expelled, evicted, and had to leave their places, the neighborhood, because of the increase of the prices, and then wealthier people came to the neighborhood. So we have this classic gentrification issue, which is mixed with 2 other phenomena. For example, in Spain, in Barcelona, we have a lot of tourism. And sometimes we always say that the housing problem is because of the tourism. But of course, gentrification and tourism are not the same. And there are different authors talking about that and how gentrification is a kind of tourism. But we also talk about touristification of the city center. And then we have other kinds of gentrification in the city, not in the city center, but in places where urban planning has been, for example, I don't know if you have heard about the super blocks we made in here. It's places where there are no longer cars, so you can walk, and there are new parks, and this can be streets and blocks. So that's why we call them super blocks. And near the super blocks, of course, the prices of the housing is increasing as well. So this is a kind of green gentrification, let's say, that when there are some kind of investments from the city council or from the public administration, and the place gets better, the housing prices also increase. And then the fourth phenomenon I would talk about is the expats phenomena, or digital nomads, we call them, because in Barcelona, after the COVID and digitalization, let's say, we have a lot of international workers with much higher wages than we do in the city, so they can pay more for housing. So there has been also in certain neighborhoods where they live an increase of prices as well, and that's also a kind of gentrification. So I'd like to explain now different kind of answers we've had from, for example, the Catalan Tenants Union. I'd like to share with you a very short video. I'll see if I can play it now. It's 3 minutes. Okay. Let me know if you can hear it.
Yes.
Casa Orsola, right here behind me, is a beautiful modernist building in the center of the Catalan capital. But it has also become a symbol of the housing crisis in Barcelona. Built just under a year ago by Italian businessman Joan Orsola, the building was bought by Lioness Inversiones in October 2021 for over 5 million euros.
That they don't renovate any of the contracts, and the idea was in order to make it empty and then start some of them in temporary contracts.
The new owners say they've done this to fix the building up and, of course, to make a profit.
Es decir, que hay contratos a término, que por eso lo compra, con esas viviendas, las alquila a precio de mercado, no a precio indefinido, y con ese dinero puede arreglar el edificio.
Although the tenants with permanent contracts have been allowed to stay, there are some whose contracts are up, but who are paying rent into an account supervised by a court. They've banded together with housing rights groups and other members of the community to fight what they call silent evictions. That is to say, being priced out of the neighborhood by gentrification.
The first one was around 2,000 euros per month. The second and the third was around 2,300, 2,400, and they go up. Usually they are foreigners. They are just for a few months because the amount they pay is huge. You know, it's, the local, I'm sure they cannot pay at all this price.
And there's this situation of resistance of the neighbors. They don't want to leave their building and they will resist.
They're currently building a superilla, or a superblock, in front of Casa Orsola. This means that they will be extending the sidewalks to pedestrianize the area further. And while the residents like the idea, they think that this is why the new property owners want to increase the prices. Talks between the...
Oh. Sorry. Okay. I would leave the video there. Okay. So that's one answer from this kind of gentrification I was talking about near the super block. And this fight is still going on. They evicted many people, but there are some other neighbors that are still living there. And then I wanted to show you some pictures as well, because we've had like we call 10 years of fight struggle against gentrification in Barcelona. Okay. And can you see now
Yes.
the picture?
Yes.
Okay. This is against, not against Airbnb, but similar, like, yes, touristic flats, demonstrations. This is Casa Orsola, the former one. Different pictures from different, that's a picture of people trying to stop an eviction. I was saying that we've had 800,000 evictions in Spain, and housing movements go to the door in order to stop the evictions. And we have like 60 evictions per week in Barcelona. So 10 evictions per day, and housing groups try to organize in order to stop the evictions at the door. And well, many other demonstrations for the right to housing and against evictions and gentrification. Okay, and just, yes, and just to end, I'd like to talk about 4 initiatives from the City Council, because housing movements have been quite well organized in Barcelona in order to fight against gentrification and touristification, etc. But also the City Council has been quite active as well. So we had a new law trying to stop Airbnb and touristic flats, let's say. No more could be opened in the city. Then we had this, this local law in which if you wanted to renovate, refurbish your house or your a block, you had to sign that you would not increase the rent to the tenants for some years. I don't remember anymore. I think it was 3 years. And then 2 more policies, one protecting the local commerce, the local shops, and another one regarding the strategic purchase of blocks and houses in risk of being evicted. So just to end, I'm sorry, it's been a bit chaos, but what I wanted to say is that gentrification in Barcelona is mixed by all these kind of different actors coming in here, like international investment funds, that this one that bought the house in the video, expats, but also other wealthy people from the city. So different actors are in here, and it's a difficult mix to face.
Thank you so much, Irene. So we have a good chunk of time for questions or any reflections, observations from the audience. I have a couple questions, but happy to start with you all if you have anything you'd like to ask our speakers. Yes, and if you could introduce yourself as well, and then Irene, I'll repeat the questions for you because it might be a little bit difficult to hear.
Hi, I'm Eamon. I'm a 1L here at DuPont. I grew up in this area, so I'm familiar with some of the challenges you spoke of. And I had a question regarding the affordable housing initiatives we've been seeing in the Triangle area, because obviously there is not enough, affordable housing is definitely starting to become an issue as more and more people move in. But a lot of local governments have passed initiatives to increase affordable housing, which is great, but often what ends up happening is you see these like luxury housing units that go up, and then you're told that those are affordable housing, or there's like 3 reserved as affordable housing. And so, as a local voter, I obviously want to, support initiatives that increase that supply, but it seems as though every time I'm voting for those things, the buildings that go up are these luxury or very they're definitely not advertised as affordable. And so I'm wondering, what, as somebody like myself, what are those, and do I have a misinterpretation of the facts? Am I not understanding, like I don't want people to live in, I want affordable housing to also look nice, right? Like, I don't want it to be, I don't want to judge a building based on the outside and think that's luxury necessarily. So maybe it's a misunderstanding on my part, but also it doesn't seem like those units are being advertised in that way. So I would appreciate your thoughts.
You're correct. And
Cameron, I'll just repeat the point for
yes, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Irene, were you able to hear that at all? Okay, I'll just repeat it. So a student who, as you said, you're from this area, you grew up in this area, and was curious about different affordable housing initiatives. That affordable housing is becoming increasingly an issue here as more and more people move in. And then on the one hand, local governments have passed different initiatives to try to achieve more affordable housing. But what we're seeing is luxury housing units that we're told are affordable, with maybe a few spaces reserved as being actually affordable. And so asking Cameron to share some thoughts about this and clarify.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. A lot of the affordable housing that's being created right now is being created from the perspective of workforce housing. And so it's trying to appeal and position or center people like yourself when you graduate from your undergrad. You're coming out with decent salaries, but you're not coming out with salaries that you can afford to move into Watts Hillendale or what, necessarily, where, houses are almost $1 million. So they're trying to have an entree point, because we have so many colleges in this area, that we're making housing accessible and affordable to young adults in the workforce. But at the same time, the rate of affordable housing that we critically need is not at 80 to 100% of the AMI, which is the average median income. We need for it to truly be affordable, beginning at 60%, I would argue, saying really, and having a nice robust amount at the 20 and 30% of the AMI. And we also have to get into this notion, in my opinion, that we have to begin to think about how we're going to take care of people who, because of what I deem as plantation and extractive capitalism, have so many mental health issues that they're probably going to have difficult time maintaining themselves. So as a populace, what do we do with people? We're just going to let them just roam the streets and live on the streets, because that creates a whole nother social set of ills that we have to contend with. I would posit that it's much cheaper, and it's also more humane, to actually come up with housing that is dignified, that has wraparound services, and that can actually help people, while we're also having workforce housing. Because a lot of the subsidy, when you think about people on welfare, welfare is no more than a subsidy for plantation capitalism. Simply because if you're making our minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. You can barely pay 2 utility bills with that. More or less feed yourself, clothe yourself, get your transportation. You can't do anything with that. And so when we see people that are working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs, the reason why they need food stamps and the reason why they need health care, that's this Medicaid, is because we're subsidizing the fact that they're not being paying based upon the AMI and the context and city in which they live. And that's why it's very important for you guys to understand, you're getting this work, there's ideas like guaranteed basic income. North Carolina is another space that we have to be very careful, because what you're talking about when they're building these units, having a certain subset like 2 and 3 and 4 units out of 150 to 200 units. That's not a lot of affordable housing at all. And our state legislature is very regressive on renters' rights. So we cannot require private industry to create a certain nice percentage of robust of affordable housing. Like they have, like in New York, or what they have out west. Now, mind you, all those areas still have huge problems with homelessness. But I believe if we had more leniency in our state legislations, and that's another thing that my husband and the team, Dr. KJ Hours, who's here at the Nicholas Institute, they're looking at preemption, how state laws are actually keeping people entrenched in material poverty, and also keeping back the civil society from us being able to actually move forward in ways that actually produce positive outcomes for everyone, both in terms of the lived environment and also in policies, and how municipalities are run, and how private entities can actually benefit or give back to the common good of man. And so our state legislature is highly regressive on those types of things. And so that's part of the reason why you don't see, because the municipalities like Durham are afraid of getting sued by the state, and they will sue Durham. But you also, I would advise you also to look at the city council meetings, and it'll become very apparent, because I always have this idea in my head what I have seen, because I'm 55 years old at this point. I've seen not a huge amount, but I've seen a nice amount. And I have seen people do what they want to have the will to do. So if you really want to have affordable housing, and in Durham, we have so many talented and brilliant people like yourself sitting in this room, that we could actually make this go away within a month if we wanted to, or less. I know that. We have the money, we have the intellect, we have the people that want to do it. But is it the will? Are we going to allow market rate forces who have dehumanized our humanity to take over and do what's best for them? And it doesn't mean that people, I don't live in this panacea, think we're gonna undo capitalism overnight. We're not going to. But capitalism doesn't have to be wholly extractive like that, because if you look in, especially in Northern European countries, they still have a capitalistic system with some social components within it that allow for people to thrive, and that allow for people to also have market rate strategies to build wealth, but not at the expense of other people. You just can't keep on doing that and expecting people to pull themselves up, and then we pathologize those people because we force them into ways of being and work that they just can't maintain themselves. And I hope no one in this room has to make the decision of whether to pay the light bill, or to keep a roof over your head, or to put food on the table. And unless you've lived in that type of identity, and especially if you've grown up in that and that's all you've seen, then your ways of problem solving are very different than people that have never had to think about that. And so I think we need just to have conversations with each other, and to realize, to go back to our humanity and realize, just like what my sister said in Barcelona, that certain ideas are not a privilege, they're a right. Water is a right. Healthcare is a right. Housing is a right. Access to healthy, nutritious food is a right. Living in clean housing that is not poisoning you and is dignified is a right. And so I would just say that, and also challenge those of us who are here who are Durhamites, look at the city council meetings. But you're spot on. You're spot on.
Irving, would you like to add anything from the Barcelona context or otherwise?
Yes, well, I would say as well that it's political will, right? That housing is a right to be provided. It doesn't mean that the city council or the state has to give a house to everyone, but that they have to protect and provide affordable housing, and try, to provide that kind of affordable housing. And for me, it's important to, when we talk about that, we have sometimes the private sector saying, okay, housing is very important. Why don't you provide it? Public housing is the most important thing here. And it's right. We have less than 2% of public housing in Spain. We are not like Northern European countries. They are quite better than we are. But then, okay, public housing is very important, but we also have to regulate the private market. And that's been a fight in here that 3 years ago, we had our first rent control law, and it was thanks to the tenants union that you could see in the video. So yes, regulation is key. And zonification, I thought you did have that zonification. I know in New York City, it has also been, I mean, it's not that simple because sometimes it can also help prices to increase somehow. But here in Barcelona, we had an important struggle to have 30% of affordable housing in every new private building, or new building, or refurbishment, because we had several investment funds buying the whole building and then renovating it and evicting people. So with this kind of renovations or new buildings, you had to have 30% of affordable housing, which at least in Catalonia, in my region, it's quite cheaper. It's cheaper than the market price. But of course, that's also a political decision, because we have now in several regions where the right-wing parties have won, they are increasing the price of affordable housing. So it's not affordable anymore. I guess, like you were saying, it's kind of luxury housing. So yes, it also depends on political decisions, I would say.
Thank you. Yes.
Right, my name is Alex. I'm also 1L here, and I want to thank you both for being here and framing this struggle in global terms, which I think is really underdone in issues of housing, and I think is really timely now. And it's great to see that kind of goal merge into one. And strategically, I think I'm seeing sort of two visions or approaches. Here in Durham, it sounds like a lot of the tactics or the strategies is organizationally based. Like the example that stands out to me is making a conduit for Black and brown communities to get produce from Black and brown farmers. And I mean, you're attacking the struggle in kind of oblique angles, I think, which is through kind of organizational means, whereas in Barcelona, from what I'm hearing, a lot of the approach is what I might term, for lack of a better word, direct action. And sort of kind of based on traditions of mass action. And my question is, do these approaches have anything to learn from each other? And what makes some things that are applicable in Barcelona perhaps inapplicable here, and vice versa?
Yeah. Irene, I'll just repeat the question from Alex, who's a first-year law student, and he was observing, based on both of your comments, that in Durham and with Communities in Partnership, the strategies have been very organization-based, and with your examples, he's heard more direct action and mass action, and learning and asking if both of these different approaches can learn from each other. And or given the different contexts, if there are things that don't work in certain contexts. Would you like to start, or should I have Cameron start?
Me?
Yes,
Okay, can you repeat the questions?
Sure.
Which are the two approaches?
Yes, so Alex was observing that Cameron had focused more on different organization-based strategies, and that you had talked more about direct action and mass action, and asked if both organizations, both movements, sort of what they can learn from each other.
Well, maybe I'm confused because I don't know your action that well, but I would say that they are, I mean, you cannot do massive actions or demonstrations or direct actions if you don't have good organizations. So the first thing we did 15 years ago was organizing people affected by mortgages, and then we had these huge organizations huge organization they called the Platform Against Evictions in Spain, with over 220 cities. I mean, they were in 220 cities in all over the country, with many people, and yes, and the organization was key at that point, and it was thanks to that organization that we could change some laws in Spain and approve new anti-evictions laws. So I would say that yes, organization is key, and then those people had that power, and we could change law because they were in the streets. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done that. They occupied banks when banks were going to evict people. They discussed with politicians, and then they organized the neighborhoods as well. So yeah, I don't know if I've understood the question well, but I would say that it's very linked.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We were founded on organizing and activism. I mean, the first public action that we created was when Bill Bell was the mayor of Durham. We participated in, basically, they were doing the Mayor's Poverty Reduction Initiative that targeted the high census tracts. So evidently, the Department of Health and Human Services published a publication that actually identified the 20 top highest census tracts that were deeply entrenched in poverty. 8 of them existed in Durham, which was bad. So the mayor decided he wanted to have a poverty reduction initiative, and unfortunately quite a few of those census tracts were located in my neighborhood in Northeast Central Durham. And so what he ended up doing was having a lot of community-based organizations and municipal folks, government people, formulating a strategy, and what we did was we stacked the meeting with community residents, and we actually held a public action where we actually did a walkout to shut everything down. And at that point, we were in talks with the mayor. It ended up not working out in the best way because they ended up, what they wanted input from the community was for the color of the brochures, and asked if they could pay people $10 an hour to canvass the neighborhood. And one of the reasons why was because when my husband stood up and asked a question, everything was based upon, he said, all you have to do is displace people and you have no more poverty in the community. What are you doing to count the people that are currently in place and to actually increase their economic mobility? And then you will have done what you said that you were going to do. But I have a feeling you're not looking to do that. I have a feeling you're just looking to displace poor Black and brown working class people. And of course it was silence, and that's what they wanted to do. And this was being done by a Black mayor. So what I'm saying is this: white supremacy can be enacted by anybody.
Audrey, and then why don't we combine the questions? Audrey, and then, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, you can go next.
I guess a question specifically, I mean, U.S. advocacy versus advocacy in Barcelona, obviously there's a very different standard in terms of Spain has ratified ICESCR while the U.S. has not. And so there's kind of a different toolbox available for advocates, specifically being to draw on the fact that a state actually has obligations under international law to supply a right to adequate housing. How do those differences change like advocacy strategies, since you can't directly pull from ICESCR from the US and say, this is actually an international law that the United States has to follow, but perhaps you can pull from other conventions to argue in a similar vein.
Thank you.
And I'm Molly, I'm a 2L here. I just wanted to quickly ask about what you see, Cameron, as the role of big institutions in Durham like Duke. I've been reading about the Duke Respect Durham movement, and which is essentially asking Duke to make voluntary payments in lieu of its tax obligations to benefit Durhamites. There might be analogs in Barcelona as well, like big companies or educational institutions that have an outsized impact on the community. So just what you view as the role of that type of thing.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, I'll just quickly repeat. Audrey was asking about, on the one hand, Spain has ratified the UN International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, whereas the US has not. And so there are also different tools that are available to us as advocates in terms of what international human rights treaties we're able to draw upon. So how this might affect the strategies that we're able to employ. And then Molly had a question about the role of big institutions, whether big companies or educational institutions. In Durham, in our case, with Duke being an example, and sort of how that might play into gentrification and addressing that as an issue, and if there's sort of comparable examples in Spain as well. Do you want to start with either one?
I can start with a question in terms of institutional impact. And so, so CIP has had fairly a mixed bag of interactions with Duke. I think even with that, we've had more positive interactions with Duke. Part of our collaboratory team, who is a really strong basis for our research arm, is Dr. Kay Jowers at the Nicholas Institute here. And so she's been with CIP for a decade at this point almost, and is considered, when she comes in the neighborhood, everybody knows who she is. I mean, she's a part of our family in CIP. Same thing with Andrew Foster at the law clinic. He's been our attorney of record for a while, outside of of my husband now, who's an attorney now, who helps us out, but he does civil litigation. He said to go to Andrew about everything else. I'll handle civil. And so, and so we've had really great relationships. Dr. Kelly Burnell, who founded the Duke World Food Policy Council. He's still our principal investigator on a lot of our food systems work, as well as some of the former employees that were at the World Food Policy Center. And so Duke can play a really good role. We're actually going to look at partnering with Duke. We're talking about partnering with them on a community-rooted leadership symposium that we hope to have in the spring to talk about how community-engaged scholarship from a community-rooted perspective really needs to take precedence, and it's a best practice nationally for people that really want to do research and work with communities to solve issues in a beneficial and restorative way and not an extractive way. And so I think leveraging institutional power and frameworks, and also working with academicians and researchers who have come from historically impacted and negatively underutilized backgrounds themselves, it helps a whole lot, but also people who just are empathetic and understand. Some people just have a natural ability to flow, like Dr. K, in our context and within our community, and does a lot of good and actually can mitigate the harm institutionally, because it's not like we haven't had our work tried to be co-opted, by some folks. I'm not going to say Duke, but some folks at Duke, because it's not just, it's the people that make those decisions. So don't let them off the hook as individuals, and so we've had instances of things, but we have been able to mitigate that or rebound from those things. I cannot say that is the case with every majority-led Black or brown organization, but I think especially under the Duke Community Affairs Office under Dr. Stephanie Williams' leadership, I think she's really doing a phenomenal job, and she's really trying to educate with this community engaged scholarship piece that they hope to launch within the next year or so. I'm hoping that they really are able to have a space where other researchers and academicians and faculty members at Duke can actually learn how to do things the right way. And so leveraging your power and access, realizing that you do have power and access, and use it for the good of all humanity, and understanding that you have a role to play as well, and also knowing when you need to lead and when you need to step back. And oftentimes when you're in communities, you need to step back and just write those checks and be there. I mean, that's the reality,
I mean, we actually we have less than a minute left, but if you could maybe briefly, I think you referenced being able to use ICESCR in the work that you do. So maybe if you can just say a couple of sentences about that.
Yes, yes, we do try to connect local affectations of human rights with the international standards, and it's true that we can use United Nations ESCR committee, which has been quite useful in Spain stopping evictions. Like they have stopped, I don't know, almost 100 evictions in Spain. But also you could use the special rapporteur, on the right to adequate housing. And some years ago, the former one, issued a report, a communication regarding 5 countries where Blackstone, as a landlord, was violating human rights. And it was about 5 countries, and one was the US, another one was Spain. So that kind of issues with this kind of, not treaty bodies, but special rapporteurs can be useful, I guess. Yep. And yes, I know the Inter-American system, you cannot use that either, I would say. So yes, you have to use that kind of international international experts, let's say.
Yeah, thank you. Well, huge thanks to Cameron and Irene and all of you for your excellent questions today. Please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you.